The night Taylor Swift let the curtain fall. There are certain Taylor Swift interviews that feel like interviews. And then there are the rare ones that feel like a window opening. For years, Taylor has become almost impossible to surprise. She knows how the headlines work. She knows how quickly a single sentence can become a viral clip. She knows that one facial expression can turn into 1,000 theories before the interview has even finished airing. But this time, something was different. Taylor walked onto The Tonight Show with an entirely different energy. The album was finally out. The fans had already embraced the life of a showgirl. She had just experienced one of the biggest streaming debuts of the year. She was engaged. She had regained control of her masters. And somehow, despite everything happening around her, she seemed genuinely relaxed. Not guarded. Not defensive. Not carefully navigating every possible headline. Just happy. And then came the moments that made the entire interview feel even more personal. Taylor talked about why this album feels so perfectly matched to the life she's living right now. She explained what the showgirl actually represents. She opened up about the engagement ring Travis Kelce spent months designing. She revealed what was really happening behind those suspiciously covered windows before the proposal. She explained why Ed Sheeran actually found out about her engagement through Instagram. She shut down several wild rumors. She talked about why she didn't pursue the Super Bowl halftime show. She explained the deeper meaning behind Opelite, YHLT, Wood, Father Figure, Elizabeth Taylor, and the fate of Ophelia. And perhaps most importantly, Taylor talked about something that has defined so much of her career: ownership. After years of feeling disconnected from some of the music she created, Taylor finally reached the point where she could look back at her earlier work without that same pain. She got her masters back. And the way she described that experience was incredibly revealing. Because underneath all the headlines, the engagement, the album, the music videos, and the jokes, there was one bigger theme running through the entire conversation. Taylor Swift sounded like someone who finally felt at home in her own life. And Swifties, if you love following every chapter of Taylor's journey, not just the headlines, but the little details that make each era feel personal, make sure you're subscribed to Taylor Timeline. Because this story has a lot more layers than one celebrity interview. And we're about to unpack all of them. The album Taylor kept secret for a year. Imagine creating an entire album and then having to keep it secret for an entire year. Not for a few weeks. Not for a couple of months. A full year. That's essentially what Taylor said she had been carrying around with the life of a showgirl. She compared the feeling to having an amazing Christmas present for someone you love, except you have to keep that present hidden for a year before they finally get to open it. And now, finally, the present was open. The album was in the world. Fans were listening. People were dissecting lyrics. Music videos were being paused frame by frame. And Taylor could finally stop protecting the secret. That alone explains why she seemed so energized. But there was another reason this particular release felt different. Taylor said the timing of the album matched her life in a way that she hadn't always experienced with previous records. And that distinction is incredibly important. Because Taylor's albums have often captured versions of herself that existed during periods of intense emotional upheaval. She explained that the Tortured Poets department, for example, highlighted a much more raw and serious side of her personality. The writer. The poet. The person willing to sit with pain and examine it in exhausting detail. The version of Taylor who wanted to put everything on the table. Every feeling. Every contradiction. Every uncomfortable detail. But the life of a showgirl represents something else. The showgirl is playful. She's funny. She's confident. She's flirtatious. She's a little mischievous. She's glamorous. She's willing to laugh. She's willing to be a little scandalous. And most importantly, she's having fun. That doesn't mean Taylor stopped being serious. It means she was choosing to spotlight another side of herself. And that may be one of the most revealing things about this entire era. Taylor has spent much of her career being defined by extremes. The teenage country singer. The pop superstar. The heartbroken songwriter. The snake. The tortured poet. The woman fighting for her masters. The performer who could sell out stadiums around the world. But now, she seemed interested in something simpler. Joy. Not perfect joy. Not a life without problems, but the kind of joy that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And perhaps that's why the album's arrival felt so perfectly timed. Taylor wasn't looking backward while releasing it. She was living inside the emotional world of it. The engagement ring that was years in the making, then came the moment everyone knew was coming. The engagement. Taylor's engagement to Travis Kelce had already become one of the biggest celebrity stories imaginable. But seeing Taylor talk about the ring was different. Because suddenly, the gigantic celebrity headline became something much more personal. She wasn't talking about an abstract relationship. She wasn't talking about rumors. She was talking about the person she gets to spend her life with. Taylor showed off the ring during the interview, and even the host couldn't hide his reaction. It wasn't just the size. It was the detail. Taylor explained that Travis had custom-designed the ring with an incredible jeweler and had apparently been holding onto it for quite some time before giving it to her. And she admitted something that made the entire conversation feel surprisingly intimate. She said she looks at it constantly, because it still doesn't feel normal. Think about that for a second. Taylor Swift is one of the most recognizable people on the planet. She has performed in front of enormous stadiums. She has walked countless red carpets. She has won major awards. She has had her life documented by millions of cameras. And yet this one object still made her look at it and think, this is real. But what mattered most wasn't the ring itself. It was what Taylor said the ring represented. She essentially reduced the entire meaning of the engagement to one incredibly simple idea. She gets to spend forever with her favorite person. Not forever with a celebrity. Not forever with a football player. Not forever with a man the internet talks about every day. Forever with the person she loves being around. That distinction matters. Because Taylor wasn't describing the engagement as a spectacle. She was describing it as companionship. The person she gets to wake up next to. The person she gets to laugh with. The person she gets to spend ordinary days with. And suddenly, the giant diamond became almost secondary. The real prize wasn't the ring. It was the life behind it. The secret garden behind the curtains. But then Taylor revealed something even more entertaining. The podcast appearance on New Heights wasn't just a podcast appearance. At least, according to the story she told. Taylor explained that Travis had suggested doing the podcast and then, afterward, asked if she wanted to walk around the backyard and have a glass of wine. For Taylor, that didn't sound suspicious at first. She would apparently always be happy to walk around the backyard and have a glass of wine. But there was one strange detail. The windows. They were covered. And not casually covered. Taylor described blackout curtains across the windows. Everywhere. That kind of secrecy eventually becomes impossible not to notice. And then she realized something else. Travis was nervous. That was apparently unusual enough to immediately stand out. Taylor said she had never really seen him nervous before. But suddenly, he was pacing around, talking about the podcast, saying his heart was racing and that he wanted everything to be what she hoped it would be. Now, imagine being Taylor Swift and hearing that from the man you're dating. You're already thinking about an album announcement. You're already doing a podcast together. The windows are mysteriously covered. He's acting nervous. And then he asks you to go outside. That's when the secret became obvious. Because the backyard had been transformed. It had become a private garden-like setting for the proposal. A hidden little world created specifically for that moment. And Taylor's reaction to realizing what was happening is perhaps more romantic than any grand celebrity proposal could have been. Because it wasn't just about the spectacle. It was about the planning, the secrecy, the effort, the fact that Travis had apparently been thinking about it long before the public ever knew. And suddenly, all those blackout curtains made sense. The mysterious nervousness made sense. The podcast made sense. The backyard made sense. The entire thing had been a setup. A very romantic one. The rumor game that actually revealed a lot. Then the interview took an unexpected turn. Taylor and the host decided to play a game based around rumors about her. And this was perfect for Taylor because very few celebrities have to deal with the sheer volume of information written about them every day. Some of it is real. Some of it is exaggerated. Some of it is completely fabricated. And sometimes even fans can't tell the difference. So 5 rumors were presented. Only one was true. And the first major twist involved Ed Sheeran. The rumor suggested that Taylor's longtime friend learned about her engagement the same way everyone else did, through Instagram. It sounded almost unbelievable. But it was true. And the explanation was hilarious. Ed Sheeran apparently doesn't have a functioning phone in the conventional sense. So Taylor realized that when she was going through her contacts and thinking about who she should personally reach out to, Ed wasn't even in the usual communication loop. She basically forgot that she had to contact him differently. Because instead of texting him like everyone else, she had to email him. And if they wanted to FaceTime, someone apparently had to find an iPad. The story was funny, but underneath it was something very sweet. Taylor clearly considers Ed family. She wasn't laughing because she doesn't care about him. She was laughing because this is simply the bizarre reality of trying to stay in touch with one of her closest friends. And that made the story feel incredibly human. Even Taylor Swift can apparently have an "oh no, we forgot to tell Ed" moment. Selena Gomez's wedding and the thing Taylor refused to do. Another rumor involved Selena Gomez. The claim was that Taylor had joked during her speech at Selena's wedding that Selena had beaten her to the altar. It sounded like exactly the kind of playful line Taylor might make. But Taylor immediately clarified that it wasn't true. And her explanation said something meaningful about her friendship with Selena. Taylor said she had made a speech, but she deliberately avoided making her own engagement part of the speech. Because Selena's wedding was Selena's day. That sounds simple. But in celebrity culture, where every major event can become part of a larger public narrative, that kind of restraint says a lot. Taylor could have easily turned the moment into a joke about their respective relationships. She could have played into the obvious headline. Instead, she chose not to. She talked about Selena. She celebrated Selena. She remembered their friendship. And she joked about something much more harmless, the way they dressed when they first met as teenagers in 2008. And Taylor's description of that era was hilarious. She remembered the aggressive fashion choices of the time. The colorful skinny jeans. The tiny vests. The tank tops. The chucks. And Taylor's own fashion identity from that period? She described herself as looking like she had somehow wandered in from a cowboy-themed junior prom. It was classic Taylor humor. Self-deprecating, specific, and nostalgic. But beneath the jokes was a reminder that Taylor and Selena didn't just meet as 2 global celebrities. They met when they were teenagers. They grew up together. They watched each other change. And now Taylor was standing at Selena's wedding, celebrating one of the most important moments of her friend's life. That history matters. Because sometimes the most meaningful relationships in Taylor's life are the ones that existed long before the world started watching every move. Why Taylor didn't want the Super Bowl halftime show then came one of the biggest rumors of all. Had Taylor turned down the Super Bowl halftime show because she wasn't allowed to own the performance footage? Taylor's answer was clear. No. That wasn't the reason. And then she explained something far more personal. She talked about Jay-Z and the relationship between their teams, explaining that there had been communication and conversations about how she felt about the idea. But her real reason for not pursuing the performance was Travis. Not because Travis told her not to. Not because he didn't want her to. Quite the opposite. Taylor explained that she is deeply invested in football while Travis is playing. She described the sport in intensely dramatic terms, essentially comparing it to dangerous, high-pressure combat. And from her perspective, the idea of watching Travis risk himself on the field every week while she was simultaneously worrying about her own halftime choreography didn't appeal to her. That wasn't a rejection of the Super Bowl. It was a statement about priorities. Taylor has spent years performing at the highest level. She knows what pressure feels like. She knows what it means to prepare for an enormous performance. But now she is also emotionally invested in someone whose career puts him in a completely different kind of high-pressure environment. And she wants to be present for that. There's something almost funny about the image. Taylor sitting somewhere watching football, completely locked into the game, while somewhere else people are asking her to think about staging, choreography, and pyrotechnics. Her response seems to be, "I have other things on my mind." And that's important because it reveals how different this chapter of Taylor's life may feel from some of the eras that came before it. Her world is still enormous. Her career is still enormous, but her priorities have expanded. The Masters. The battle Taylor finally won, then the conversation became much more serious. Taylor revealed that she now controls all of her masters. And for Taylor Swift, that isn't simply a business achievement. It's deeply personal. Taylor explained that she had once accepted the possibility that she would never own the original recordings of her first 6 albums. She had made peace with the idea that she would have to re-record them. And eventually, she did. The Taylor's Version project became one of the most significant re-recording campaigns in modern music. But the emotional reason behind it was even more important. Taylor described what it was like seeing her old music videos or hearing songs from those early albums while knowing that she didn't own the recordings. Instead of feeling nostalgic, she could feel hurt. She essentially had to protect herself from her own memories. Imagine creating something that represents years of your life and then feeling like you can't fully embrace it because someone else controls the underlying recordings. That is an unusual kind of emotional distance. Those songs were hers creatively. They came from her experiences. She wrote them. She recorded them. She performed them. Fans built memories around them. But legally and financially, she didn't have the ownership she wanted. So she developed a kind of protective layer. If an old music video appeared, she didn't want to stare too long. If an old song came on, she didn't want to let herself become overwhelmed by the memory. Because the reminder of what she didn't own was attached to the nostalgia. But now, she said she has had to reroute that entire emotional response. Now she can hear those songs and simply feel happy. She can remember where she was when she wrote them. She can remember recording them. She can revisit the past without feeling like something has been taken away from her. And that's why getting her masters back may be one of the quietest but most meaningful victories of this entire era. The public sees ownership as a business term. Taylor experienced it as emotional freedom. Why Taylor wanted fans to understand the business. Taylor also made an important point about the Taylor's Version project. She knew not every fan would automatically care about music ownership. And she wasn't demanding that they care. Instead, she wanted them to understand that the issue existed. Because contracts, masters, ownership and negotiations usually happen behind closed doors. They happen in conference rooms. They happen in legal documents. They happen in conversations most fans never hear. Taylor pulled that curtain back. And once she did, other artists and aspiring musicians could see the same business structure from the outside. Her message wasn't simply, "Everyone should do what I did." It was closer to, "If ownership matters to you, know that you can negotiate for it." That is a much bigger legacy than simply re-recording old songs. It turns a personal battle into an education. And Taylor acknowledged that fans caring about the issue meant a lot to her. Because they didn't have to care. They could have simply listened to the songs. Instead, they became part of the conversation. They learned why ownership mattered. They understood why Taylor's Version existed. And now she has reached the point where she owns the originals. The circle has finally closed. The showgirl, who knows what it costs. This brings us back to the album itself. Because the life of a showgirl isn't simply about glitter, glamour, and performance. It's also about the price of living publicly. Taylor explained that the idea of the showgirl allowed her to explore the playful side of being a public figure. But she also recognized the chaos that comes with living under constant observation. And that's why the song, "The Life of a Showgirl," became so important. The central idea is essentially a warning. You may see the glamour. You may see the costumes. You may see the applause. You may see the success. But you don't necessarily see the price. Taylor specifically wanted Sabrina Carpenter involved. And that choice makes sense within the album's larger theme. Taylor sees Sabrina as someone who understands the strange combination of confidence, humor, vulnerability, and chaos that comes with being a modern entertainer. Their experiences aren't identical. Taylor pointed out that she came up before social media became the force it is today. Sabrina's experience as a newer artist has happened in a completely different media environment. But Taylor believes artists can still recognize themselves in each other. Because one of the jobs of an artist is to hold up a mirror. You look into the work. And somehow, you see part of yourself. That's one reason Taylor said she appreciates having so many different albums. A fan might not understand one era at one point in their life. Then 5 years later, that same album can suddenly become their favorite. Because the listener changed. And the music was waiting for them. That's the strange power of Taylor's catalog. The songs don't necessarily change. The person listening to them does. Opalite and the Choice to Make Your Own Happiness. One of the most revealing songs Taylor discussed was Opalite. She explained that opalite is a man-made form of opal. And for her, that became the perfect metaphor. Life doesn't always give you what you want. People will disappoint you. Things will go wrong. Your heart can break. Chaos can arrive without warning. And sometimes happiness doesn't simply appear. You have to create it. You have to choose it. That's what Taylor connected to the idea of man-made opal. Something beautiful can still be created intentionally. That idea feels especially relevant to the Taylor Swift we were seeing during this interview. Because the happiness she described wasn't passive. It wasn't, everything magically worked out. It was, I went through difficult things. I learned. I changed. I built something different. And now I'm choosing happiness. That's a very different message from simply saying life is perfect. It's more mature. Because it acknowledges that happiness isn't always something the world hands you. Sometimes you have to make it yourself. The wish list Taylor never hides from. Then came $T. And perhaps no song better captured the domestic fantasy Taylor described in the interview. A home. A driveway. A basketball hoop. Children. A quiet life with the person she loves. It is almost strikingly ordinary. And that's exactly why it matters. 4 years, Taylor Swift's life has been anything but ordinary. Stadium tours. Private jets. Awards. Red carpets. Chart records. Global headlines. But the fantasy she described in this song is almost the opposite. It's a place to escape. A private little world. A home. A person. A family. A driveway. A basketball hoop. Taylor even joked that she learned about sports for Travis. She may not necessarily want to participate in every sport herself, but she enjoys watching him do what he loves. And that tells you something about their relationship. Sometimes love isn't about becoming exactly like the other person. It's about becoming interested in the things that matter to them. Even if you're still learning the rules. Even if you don't want to actually play. You watch. You learn. You cheer. And that ordinary intimacy may be one of the most important themes running through this album. Wood, and the song that went off the rails. Then there was Wood. Taylor explained that the song began innocently. She wanted a timeless, throwback-style sound. She had the idea of knocking on wood and superstition. But somewhere between the initial idea and the final recording, things became considerably more suggestive. Taylor admitted that the song essentially went off the rails. And she seemed delighted about it. That may actually be one of the clearest examples of what the showgirl personality represents. She doesn't always need to explain herself. She can be playful. She can be cheeky. She can let a joke sit there. She can write something provocative and simply say, this is what it became. And that's part of the freedom of this era. Taylor doesn't sound like she's trying to prove that she's serious enough. She already proved that. Now she can have fun. Father figure, and the power games behind the curtain. Then came Father Figure. This song took the conversation into a much darker place. Taylor described it as being about the relationship between a mentor and a protege. But more specifically, she became fascinated with power. Who has it? Who thinks they have it? What happens when the protege becomes powerful enough to challenge the person who taught them? And what happens when loyalty breaks down? Taylor connected the song's energy to Succession, particularly the character Logan Roy. That comparison tells you a lot. Because this isn't simply a sweet mentor story. It's about manipulation, business, loyalty, ambition, control, and the possibility that the person being trained eventually becomes strong enough to threaten the person doing the training. What makes the song even more interesting is that Taylor said she can relate to both sides. She understands the younger person trying to navigate the system. But she also understands the person who has learned the business well enough to recognize how power actually operates. That dual perspective gives the song another layer. It's not simply about a villain and a victim. It's about an ecosystem. And Taylor has spent enough time inside the entertainment industry to understand exactly how complicated those relationships can become. Why Elizabeth Taylor became the perfect icon then came Elizabeth Taylor. Taylor's admiration for Elizabeth Taylor was obvious. But her explanation went deeper than glamour. She admired Elizabeth Taylor because of how she handled scrutiny. The fame, the pressure, the criticism, the public fascination with her personal life. And despite all of it, Elizabeth kept taking risks. She kept making ambitious choices. She kept performing. She kept creating. And Taylor admired the humor, too. That part is particularly important. Taylor has often used humor to reclaim narratives about herself. If people were going to describe her as some exaggerated version of the serial dater or the man-eater, she could take that caricature and turn it into blank space. Instead of fighting every criticism head-on, she could exaggerate it until it became ridiculous. That is a very Taylor strategy. Don't just defend yourself. Sometimes make the joke bigger than the insult. And that's exactly the kind of confidence she seemed to admire in Elizabeth Taylor. The song itself is designed around glamour, luxury, beauty, drama, a larger-than-life personality. It feels almost tailor-made for the showgirl concept. The fate of Ophelia, and finally, we reach the song that may sit at the emotional center of this entire era, The Fate of Ophelia. The title immediately evokes Shakespeare. Ophelia is one of literature's most tragic figures. Her story is associated with heartbreak, isolation, and destruction. But Taylor's song flips that narrative. Instead of accepting Ophelia's fate, the narrator is rescued from it. And that reversal is significant. Taylor has spent years writing about heartbreak. She has written from inside the pain. She has written about isolation. She has written about feeling misunderstood. She has written about losing people. She has written about rebuilding herself. But here, the story changes. The tragedy doesn't happen. The ending is rewritten. And that may be one of the biggest ideas behind the entire album. You don't have to remain trapped inside the story everyone expected for you. You can rewrite the ending. You can change the character. You can change the life. You can choose something else. Taylor also explained that the song deliberately blends different eras of language. There are Shakespearean-style phrases alongside modern expressions. Old-world romantic imagery meets contemporary language. And that creates the feeling of two timelines colliding. Past and present. Literature and pop culture. The tragic heroine and the modern woman. The old Taylor and the Taylor who exists now. And maybe that's why the song feels so fitting for this moment in her life. Because Taylor Swift has always been fascinated by eras. But now she isn't simply looking back at them. She's taking pieces of them and carrying them forward. The video that breaks the painting, the music video for The Fate of Ophelia, continues that idea. Taylor explained that the visual world begins with something that resembles a painting. But then the perspective shifts. And suddenly, what looked flat becomes three-dimensional. What appeared to be one world reveals layers behind it. Taylor described this visual concept as breaking the parallax. And that idea works almost perfectly as a metaphor for her career. Because the public has always seen one version of Taylor. But behind that version are layers. The songwriter. The performer, the director, the businesswoman, the daughter, the friend, the partner, the person who loves baking bread, the person who gets obsessed with a new hobby and can't stop talking about it, the person who can sell out stadiums and then spend an unreasonable amount of time discussing sourdough. That last detail became one of the funniest parts of the interview. Taylor admitted she has become extremely passionate about bread. She even baked the host 2 loaves. And apparently warned him not to bring them onto television because she didn't want to become known as the person who couldn't stop talking about bread. Of course, that only made the story funnier. Because that's the Taylor fans love. Not just the superstar. The person underneath the superstar. The woman who can spend months thinking about a record and then suddenly become completely obsessed with sourdough. The little details that made Taylor feel human. This is where the interview became something more than an album promotion. Because between the huge revelations were these tiny details. Taylor talking about bread. Taylor talking about cinnamon rolls. Taylor watching television. Taylor discussing the Gilded Age. Taylor talking about movies. Taylor recommending Tate McRae. Taylor remembering the last concert she attended. Taylor describing the tradition she follows before every new album. The night before a new era begins, she listens to the entirety of the previous album. She says goodbye to it. Think about how emotional that is. Imagine spending years creating an album, living inside it, touring it, promoting it, watching fans make memories with it. And then, the night before the next chapter begins, sitting down and listening to the entire thing one last time. Not because the music is disappearing, but because the era is ending. That's a ritual. A private goodbye. And then the next morning, the new Taylor begins. It's a beautiful way to think about her career. Every album is both a beginning and an ending. The Eras Tour never really left. Even though the Eras Tour is over, its presence was everywhere in this conversation. Taylor talked about the final concert she attended. She talked about reuniting with the people who worked with her during the tour for the Fate of Ophelia music video. And she explained why the video's one-take sequences reminded her of performing live. No constant cutting. No hiding behind edits. No endless opportunities to fix a mistake. You hit your mark. You deliver. And you keep going. That is exactly what live performance demands. Taylor said the music video brought back that energy. And bringing the Eras Tour team back together created a kind of reunion. That detail matters because the Eras Tour wasn't simply another tour. It became a defining chapter in Taylor's career. So seeing those people return for this new era creates a bridge between two versions of Taylor. The stadium performer and the showgirl. Different aesthetics, different music, different energy, but the same instinct to perform. The real reason this era feels different, and when you put everything Taylor said together, a much bigger picture begins to emerge. The engagement, the masters, the album, the humor, the music videos, the friendships, the relationship with Travis, the freedom to revisit her older music, the desire to have fun. They may seem like separate stories. They're not. They're all connected by one idea. Taylor is no longer talking about what she lost. She's talking about what she has. For years, so much of Taylor's public story was defined by conflict. Who misunderstood her? Who hurt her? Who owned what? Who controlled what? Who said what? What went wrong? What she needed to reclaim. And now, she can talk about a future, a partner, a home, a family, a career she controls, music she owns, an album that reflects her happiness, a past she can finally revisit without the same emotional weight. That's a completely different narrative. And perhaps that's why the showgirl metaphor works so well. A showgirl understands that the audience sees the performance. But she also knows everything happening backstage. The exhaustion, the pressure, the preparation, the risks, the moments when the costume comes off and the lights go dark. Taylor has lived that life. She knows exactly what it costs. But now, she seems determined to enjoy the performance too. What Taylor's words really say about her next chapter, the most fascinating thing about this interview wasn't any single revelation. It was the combination. Taylor didn't sound like someone trying to convince the audience that everything was perfect. She sounded like someone who had survived enough to appreciate the good parts. There's a difference. She knows what heartbreak feels like. She knows what losing control feels like. She knows what it means to be criticized by millions. She knows what it means to have her private life turned into public entertainment. She knows what it means to fight for ownership. She knows what it means to walk away from one era and start another. And now she knows something else. She knows what it feels like to finally get some of the things she fought for. The masters. The relationship. The freedom. The ability to make music simply because it is fun. And perhaps most importantly, the ability to look at her own history and feel joy instead of pain. That's growth. Not pretending the past never happened. Not erasing the difficult chapters. but finally being able to look back at them without being controlled by them. The moment that brought the whole interview together near the end of the conversation, Taylor and the host were talking about music, entertainment, and the work they had both spent years doing. And Taylor turned the praise back toward him. She thanked him for making artists feel comfortable. She thanked him for caring about their work. She pointed out that he always goes the extra mile. And suddenly, the host became emotional. It was one of those moments that wasn't planned as the headline. But maybe it should be. Because Taylor has built much of her career around the idea that people should care about the work. Not just the celebrity. Not just the spectacle. The work. The songwriting. The performance. The creativity. The people behind it. And here she was, doing exactly that for someone else. That moment also revealed something about why Taylor keeps returning to shows like this. She could simply promote the album. She could give rehearsed answers. She could move through the press circuit. Instead, she jokes. She improvises. She talks about bread. She gets emotional. She discusses her friends. She talks about Travis. She explains her songwriting. She debates rumors. She plays ridiculous games. And for a few minutes, the biggest pop star in the world gets to simply be a person sitting on a couch. That might be the real magic of the interview. The bigger story behind the biggest year. Taylor described this period as an enormous year. And objectively, it is difficult to argue. A new #1 album. A massive release. A major music video. A new chapter after the Eras tour. A high-profile engagement. Ownership of her masters. A continued relationship with fans who have followed her through every era. But the biggest achievement might not be any of those individual headlines. It might be that Taylor appears to have reached a point where the pieces of her life finally fit together. The artist. The businesswoman. The performer. The friend. The partner. The person behind the celebrity. For years, those identities could sometimes feel like they were competing with one another. Now they seem to be coexisting. And that's why the album's title feels so fitting. The showgirl is the performer. But she is also the woman backstage. And perhaps Taylor is finally comfortable being both. What Swifties should take away from this era, if there's one message running underneath the life of a showgirl, it may be this. You don't have to wait for life to give you permission to be happy. You can choose it. You can build it. You can protect it. You can surround yourself with people who make you feel safe. You can rewrite the ending of a story that once seemed inevitable. You can reclaim what you thought you had lost. You can look at the past without letting it control your future. And you can have fun again. That's perhaps the most striking difference between the Taylor discussed in some of her earlier eras and the Taylor sitting on that late-night stage. She's still thoughtful. She's still intensely analytical. She's still obsessed with details. She's still a songwriter who can spend hours turning one image into an entire world. But she's laughing more. She's teasing more. She's talking about domestic dreams. She's talking about love. She's talking about food. She's talking about friendship. She's talking about ownership. And she's talking about the future. That's not a small change. That's a new chapter. The end of one story, the beginning of another. At the beginning of this story, Taylor walked onto the stage surrounded by one of the loudest crowds imaginable. The audience screamed. The album was #1. The engagement was public. The masters were hers. The new era had officially begun. But by the end of the interview, the noise wasn't what stayed with you. It was the quieter details. Taylor looking at her ring. Taylor talking about Travis as her favorite person. Taylor remembering Selena as a teenager. Taylor realizing she had forgotten to call Ed. Taylor talking about her old albums. Taylor describing the strange feeling of finally being able to love her own memories again. Taylor explaining why she chooses happiness. Taylor talking about the people who helped her make the music. Taylor getting emotional. Taylor laughing about bread. Taylor singing with a crowd that already knew songs from a brand new album. Those are the moments that tell the real story. Because the story of Taylor Swift has never really been about one giant headline. It's about the accumulation of moments. A lyric. A friendship. A performance. A heartbreak. A decision. A business battle. A new beginning. A private tradition. A person standing beside her. A fan singing back every word. And now, perhaps, a woman who has spent years fighting to own her story finally getting to enjoy it. That's what makes this era feel so different. Taylor isn't just performing a new chapter. She's living it. And maybe that's why the life of a showgirl arrived at exactly the right moment. Because after all the eras, all the records, all the battles, all the reinventions and all the noise, Taylor Swift finally seems to be enjoying the view from the stage. Not because everything has been easy, but because she knows exactly what it took to get here. And if the past has taught us anything, it's that whenever Taylor enters a new era, there is always another story waiting behind the curtain. So whatever comes next, another song, another video, another chapter, another unexpected reveal, one thing is certain. Swifties will be watching. And here at Taylor Timeline, we'll be watching with you. Because Taylor's story isn't just about where she is today. It's about everything that brought her here. And sometimes, the most beautiful part of the story isn't the moment the curtain rises. It's realizing how much Taylor had to overcome before she was finally ready to step into the light. This is the showgirl era. And this time, Taylor owns the stage.